It is to exist in the highest, most authentic expression of who I am and what I do at my own pace and rhythm. Saludos and welcome to the Rematriating Borikén podcast, where we discuss the journey to the essence of these islands, this archipelago and her surrounding waters, the restoration of our essence before conquest and continued colonialism, the reclamation of our collective healing and liberation. I am Yasmin Hernandez, creator of Cucubanación, artist, writer, activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, Rematriating Borikén. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode, another year of the Rematriating Borikén podcast. This is Yasmin pulling from abysses and wells, trying to find the ánimo to record this. I ain't gonna lie. It's funny that I open up saying another year of the Rematriating Borikén podcast, but considering how we began 2025, considering that we began with a power outage, a national power outage again, and then this tourist setting fire to a few businesses in Cabo Rojo, to then the wildfires in LA. It's some bewildering stuff, man. And I make that reference to the year because of all the ways that we are expected to adhere to cycles and clocks that aren't ours, that do not follow our natural rhythm. This break reminds me of the winter of 2022 into 2023. That winter, I'm going to say winter because I was born and raised in Brooklyn. Obviamente, yo estoy viviendo en Puerto Rico. Aquí no hay invierno. But it's funny. It's funny that you cannot force certain things. So just because I live in the tropics doesn't mean that my body falls immediately out of rhythm with the place it was born in. It took me several years to fall into a rhythm here, but the rhythm comes. And it's interesting how when folks visit in these months in December, in January, and they're like, we're going to the beach, and we're like, it's cold. It took a few years for that to happen. That we, it sounds ludicrous for folks living through like single or teen digit temperatures. Pero la realidad es que sí, sentimos frío. Like, you go to Montones in Isabela this time of year, it's going to be like a windstorm. And we first went there when my first son was 11 months. Y ese chico le dio a llorar y gritar because we had been in the water. And when we got out, it was just brutal wind and you're wet, it's windy, and no importa si el sol está caliente, como que eso fastidia, especially for a baby. So we've fallen into that rhythm. Like, I don't go out this time of year without a sweater. Once the sun goes down, I'm going to be chilly. That sort of thing. And if it sounds, for those who do not live here, if it sounds over the top, it's what it is. It's like, part of coming into this and this conversation and these discussions is releasing the need to police what I say to ensure other people's comfort. I think that we need to speak with a free authenticity because we can't get to the truth and we can't get to a real place of understanding if we are expected to tiptoe around everyone all the time, right? It's something that we encounter whenever there are differences, which that's what humanity is. That's the diversity of humanity and our uniqueness that should be celebrated. But, tonterias, like I remember as a new mother, like, okay, how did you birth? Where did you birth? Are you nursing? Are you not nursing? Those things that instead of creating, a bigger or greater solidarity support system, lo que hace es que like breeds this divide, and like we don't need that anymore. And so I'm speaking what is, and that things are relative. It's kind of like when I was an undergrad and we Black and brown folk used to comment on how some of the white folk would be outside in shorts in like 60-degree weather. And we'd be like, what the hell is that? And we'd be like, yo, is that Nordic blood? So humans be doing that, It's like Spike Lee and Do the Right Thing. We'd be like poking fun at each other for our differences. But there comes a time when those little jokes like ain't funny. And the reality is to understand and to get to know where folks are so that we can understand or overstand deeply. I am reminded of, going back to what I was saying, I am reminded of that time, that transition between 2022 and 2023, because after 2 years of doing everything possible to protect myself and my family from COVID, we all got COVID. And we all got COVID over the holidays when my sister and her family were visiting. And so we had family staying with us and we couldn't be together. We all had to be quarantining within the home. And it was one of the most miserable holidays, I think. I mean, we managed to squeeze some good memories, but it was extremely challenging to be together but not be able to be together. It was like a mind F. And then the last person to get it was my mother. So like New Year's Eve, she was sick, right? And it was just cycling. Actually, what I have to say is the people who were visiting, my sister and her kids, didn't get COVID. So everybody got it except them. And we couldn't be around them. We couldn't. It was awful. And the reason why I think about that is that though it wasn't COVID, this break, there's all this like respiratory shit still going around. And I started the break sick. Today, January 13th, se supone January 13th was my kid's first day of school. You are talking about a whopping month-long vacation. Hay un colibrí, caramba. I wish I could record that. I'm waiting for my kid to get out of class, and there's a whole hummingbird, little BB, delicate hummingbird buzzing in a tree here. I'm recording this where I can because this has been the nature of this past month, and this has been the nature especially of these first 13 days of 2025, today being the full moon as I record this, full moon in Cancer, I believe. Hella emotional, hella in all the feels. And so starting that break sick, with some other business, and then coming out of the break with one of my children sick. And last week, my mom and I haven't been, having been sick in a different way. It started with a respiratory thing. Last week was a gastro thing. And then my mom was sick. And this week, my son is sick. De hecho, no está en la escuela hoy and won't be most of the week. And so it has been a meditation on what these things, these like imposed traditions like New Year's, which aren't ancestral traditions, right? It's this Gregorian calendar, doesn't follow really what our ancestors would follow with, say, the moon cycle. I reference having been born and raised in the North because this time of year, my body still longs to hibernate. It longs to just like crawl into a cave and stay there. And I live in a place where Boricuas are, some of the most fervent Christmas and holiday celebrators. And I am a big, big fan of Dia de los Reyes and continuing that celebration. And I love it all. And in many ways, my bones are still synchronized to the cold in some respects. In other respects, I am also synchronized. Like, it's probably safe to say that my bones might be acclimated to both places. Like, pero que there's elements that are still very much of New York, and there are elements that are now remembering in my DNA what it is to be aligned to this place, to Borikén, to the warmth, to the tropics, but place that here and my birthplace share, or a thing that is shared by my birthplace and here, is the solstices and the northern solstice, and that the nights get darker and longer and longer and longer, and us falling into this como que una pausa. Our indigenous ancestors here, from my understanding, didn't do much night activity, weren't out and about in the dark as much. And so when those nights get longer, it's like going within, like the bohío, la cueva, the cave becomes the safe place. The safe house is home. It's being dark and cozy and finding that inner light and that cycle. And then having to just be forced to come out and say, it's New Year's Eve. This is when I start, hey, the resolutions. Hey, I'm going to start working this way this day. Hey, I'm going to be in school this day. And life will start on this schedule. And then you enter a period where tú trata y no se da. Tú trata y no se da. That has been my story for several weeks. Oh, I had a great idea for a podcast. I'm gonna, new moon. There was a new moon on December 30th. Perfect. It's the day before New Year's. Start to record it, working on that. And then I'm like, all right, cool. Couldn't get it for the 30th. All good. I'll put it up for the 31st, or even for the 1st. We'll see. Wake up on the 31st. No light. National power outage. There won't be a podcast, Sing Lu. And so here I am over 2 weeks later, and I'm still stuck on this loop of kind of like this stagnation. And the odd part to it is that though there are many challenges, though the images that I have seen of these wildfires and like the barrage of conspiracy theories, which I don't even like that term, conspiracy theories, because what we're seeing more and more and more in the world is just the revelation of what is, of all the shitty shit that is. And the contrast and the clash between the ancestral ways that would work in harmony with the earth and the ways of corporate capitalism and colonialism that seek to exploit and exacerbate some of nature's natural cycles like fires and the cleansing and the purging and regeneration that happens in nature. These are cycles that our own bodies are supposed to go through. And the issue is that with all these celebrations around things like New Year's and resolutions and getting people to commit to new things and to improve, it's not really an improvement of healing, of stepping into deeper sovereignty. The improvement that society usually promotes have to do with our capacity to be more organized, more productive. It's your capacity to serve and produce and create at a rate that is more desirable to this consumption and urgency culture that the internet has helped stamp across the globe. And so in many ways, I've resisted this, like, oh, but I wanted to do this. I got to start programs at Cucubanación. I have to. Y por otro lado, es como que, ¿sabes qué? Fuck it. Like, si no se puede, no se puede. And if I'm a mother and I'm dealing with issues around my child's health, my own health, caretaking, my mother's health, then there's a different rhythm, there's a different flow that I must adhere to, and that we as a collective are being called back to. And that is the flow that shit happens. And we need to allow ourselves the capacity to stop and pause and care for one another, see one another, support one another in our healing processes, support one another before even the healing process, support one another in normalizing rest, relaxation, and regeneration. More and more beyond COVID, we're seeing so many more ailments and things, just all sorts of things. And I even question the prevalence of all these respiratory things beyond COVID that seem to have exploded in these years since COVID, right? Like things that we didn't hear about as much or as often, and now all of a sudden they seem to be everywhere, y como que tumbando gente. So it calls to question too our scheduling, our when we carve those spaces for rest, how we eat, our diet, the stressors that we have in our lives, like how this affects our immunity, right? That's what I'm seeing, that this urgency culture has us all without immunity, our immune systems wiped out, or like struggling because we're constantly battling against the clock, against time, deadlines, trying to win this award, trying to get this grant, trying to get this raise. And it's like we're all those animals pressing levers in the lab trying to get that Scooby snack or whatever, like trying to get that reward, like conditioned for that dopamine hit on the likes and the follows and all of these things. And sometimes the shit that happens, there's a frustration. We feel like our path, our time, our schedule, our plans have been disrupted. Y muchas veces son cosas que pasan para enseñarnos y despertarnos a que sometimes these things happen to cause us to stop and reflect. Es como le decimos el tate quieto. It's like the stop being put on you. You're being, the universe is stopping you in your tracks to be like, yo, is this the most effective way to function? Is this the way to be at your best, be at your most whole, be at your most well state? Is this how your creativity and your creative output could flow best? I didn't say your productivity, but your creative output, because everything we do is a creative output, from cooking a meal to how we organize our homes, so many things. So I moved and am recording from home, where there's been a bird convention happening this week. Mainly los turpiales, which there are some resident turpiales living in the poste de luz in front of my neighbor's house across the street. And they feast off my mom's figs downstairs. So they're happy people. That sounded like one of those little baby parrots, but we have a whole assortment of birds, and they're part of the community here, as are the chickens and the gallos, and they will be heard talking above me. They're actually much more beautiful to listen to than I am. In episode 4 of this podcast, it's called Cycles and Circles, that episode. And I talk about what it is to live cycles and what it is to loop in circles around. In that particular episode, I'm referencing anniversaries, and some were celebratory. And that one, I'm speaking to the anniversary of our arrival here in Borikén. And I also speak to how I personally live in the loops of not so good anniversaries, or I should say commemorations of historic dates in Puerto Rico's history, dates of injustices, dates of tragedies that were committed against our people, against our lands. I recorded that around April of 2024. And so I'm making references to April 19 with the killing of David Sanes Rodriguez in Vieques when a US Navy pilot missed his target, instead dropping some bombs near the observation point where David worked. And 2 days after that, April 21st, is the anniversary of when Pedro Albizu Campos passed after having been subjected to radiation experiments while a federal prisoner, political prisoner in the US. Here, it started here in La Princesa prison, and it happened also while in prison in the US, as happened to so many other prisoners of that time. But in the case of Pedro Albizu Campos, there was a greater conspiracy as to why he in particular was subjected to those experiments as a form of torture for his work against US colonialism in Puerto Rico and in other places, right? Because he was in solidarity with the Irish struggle and others. And so to bring this back to how I opened this conversation, it is to reevaluate the clocks and the calendars. I'm moving from cycles and circles to clocks and calendars, and reevaluate how we work with these tools as they impose this urgency culture upon us, as they measure success always by our levels of productivity and service to others. And service to others is clearly something that should be part of what we do, right? But the difference is whether we are in service from our highest selves in place of gratitude to the people that we are most choosing to serve, versus servitude in the form of productivity, which is, and the form of, created for consumption, which is really remnants of chattel slavery, and that idea that our worth as Black and Brown peoples is most connected to our output, how much we work, how much we do, how much we serve others. And so undoing that conditioning by instead centering our wellness, our capacity to care for ourselves and each other, centering our right to rest, our right to heal, our right to regenerate, sleep, and rest are crucial to the process of healing and regenerating. And when I say regenerating, I don't mean just replenishment of our bodies and minds and energy, but the literal regeneration of cells and the healing process that happens during the sleep cycles. So that when we rob ourselves of these, we are cutting our capacity to heal and to be well. And only when we have established that we are at that place of wellness, that our nidos, our homes, our sanctuaries, and ourselves and everyone in them are at a good place as much as we can be. Not that we are responsible for everyone's health and wellness. Everyone has their own sovereignty, but when we are raising people or caretaking, then that does fall more in our hands in the sense of caring, but also modeling, more importantly, modeling how we care for ourselves. What are the foods we consume? How do we prepare our foods? What are the foods that we put on our tables? Like, what are these ancestral ways that we could bring in? What are the ways that we can move from these prepackaged and imposed diets that keep us sick to working with foods as medicine, which is something that I try to do heavily in my household. When someone is sick, that's when I bring in, like, pulling from different cuisines and my own, but that's when I'm going to pull in like some guisos that can incorporate more oregano brujo, which is a natural antibiotic or antibacterial, cilantro también, ajo, garlic also. And then I also pull in more Indian type foods. My children love lentils. They love, one of my favorite dishes that I just recently learned how to make in like the past year is chicken korma. Like, so dishes that I could bring in turmeric, ginger, right? These are, turmeric always goes with black pepper to help with the absorption into our bodies, but these are anti-inflammatories. They boost our immunity. How are we cooking intentionally to ensure that we are receiving medicines? My children, as they got older, just did away with the whole vegetable thing. I used to make their baby food when they were babies. They ate any darn vegetable I put into them. They were happy to have it until they turned around 5. And then it was like, no more. So I still have to sneak in a lot of that stuff to get them well and to keep their bodies healthy, and also shifting the narrative with how we approach food. The other thing that we do here is incorporating lots of yogurt, right? Lots of probiotics and honey, raw honey as medicines as well. And so modeling that so that we can center our wellness, our physical wellness, but also an emotional and spiritual wellness. These are so, so, so important. I listen to these birds that are just straight chilling, right? There's that reference that's always made about birds waking up and not stressing about where they're going to get food from, right? The abundance that they live, like going in on mommy's figs. There will be food from somewhere. Watching la gallina on a daily basis coming through, y con sus pies, they got some strong ass feet, empezando a revolcar y revolcar la tierra hasta encontrar esos gusanitos, and then all the little pollitos come and eat from there. It is a daily practice and a joy in their routines, in their search for sustenance, in their song, in their conversation. Ahí van. It's really hard to live a life where you have that as the constant background, audio background, the soundtrack of your days, and then allow yourself to move away from your true nature. And part of rematriation is that capacity to reinsert into nature. Like, all this earth is our womb. And for those of us born or raised or living still in cities, being of concrete, how do we keep ourselves from not becoming that concrete? And it is why I specifically chose not to return to not to come here and move to San Juan. I could have done that, and that's what would have been expected of me as an artist, to be where the art center was on this island. But as I said, also, perdón, my family's from Ponce. Ponce has a beautiful art scene too. I didn't go there. And what I said was, I'm not leaving a city to move to another. That was my personal journey. This is nothing against folks who live in cities. I also often reference how growing up in New York City, growing up in Brooklyn, it's very specific to Brooklyn, but it exists all throughout New York City, which in its own ways functions as an archipelago because it's a series of islands and marshes. And I grew up like that. I grew up on the water. My father, being from Ponce, loved to fish. We would hit up all the Belt Parkway, all them crazy beaches, little random ass beaches like Plum Beach. My sister used to make fun of him because she'd be like, what kind of stuff are you fishing off of Plum Beach, right? Back in the day, Plum Beach was a little more shady. I don't know what it is today. But that's what we did. He would take fish line, tie it around, wrap it around the necks of brown cerveza bottles, and that's how he would fish. Hacía su jaula y pescaba cocolía. I grew up very much on the water, or approximate to the water. Those were my most beautiful memories of Brooklyn, is driving along the belt all the way from the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, wrapping around down to the south, the Belt Parkway, past the Verrazano, past Coney Island, all the way to the Rockaways, approaching Cross Bay down to the Rockaways. That is the essence of my childhood. For me, before we came here, before we moved to Puerto Rico, I was convinced that in order to draw this reality to me, that I needed to live it right where I was. And so the last years in New York, I was going to the shore more. I was going to see the sunset more. I'm also very much a fall person. I love the fall. It was actually my favorite season. And I desperately miss the fall. Lo que eran those like harvest events and the hay rides and apple picking and all that business, and leaves falling on the ground and having my children jump into piles of leaves in the park, like all of that. And I state this because I don't want people to think that you cannot rematriate if you're not in your ancestral land. As I said, all the earth is our womb. Nature is everywhere, and we just need to find her and align to her. And actually, human wellness depends on it. Humanity's survival and thrival depends on it. In these conversations about these horrendous fires, be they natural, be they man-made, they were lived. There was destruction. Conversations arise around indigenous practices and how those lands were maintained, how controlled strategic fires were created. And we'll see that those of us who come from all these tropical places, some of us as kids or our parents or grandparents may remember the burning of the fields of cane, right? So that there are these strategic ways that fires can be used and controlled. And there's specific borders that are made to control those fires as a way of maintaining the lands, as a way of keeping a sacred equilibrium so that things don't spread wild and take over in a destructive force. So when we lose that sensibility, when we lose our desire to create, when we are governed by our desire to control, and a desire to control is also a very destructive desire, then that's what it produces, is destruction. And that is what we are seeing. The other thing is, if this is something that has happened before, if this has happened in San Francisco, if this just happened barely a year ago in Maui, and there were few that paid attention to the fires in Maui, and if we're not listening to our neighbors and our brothers and our sisters and learning from what they lived and what they experienced, and heeding those lessons and heeding those warnings and putting into practice what they learned, then we are failing greatly. And so what we are seeing today is how catastrophe being the word, same word for Nakba, same word for Holocaust. Catastrophe is a catastrophe is a catastrophe. And one person's catastrophe is everybody's catastrophe. A lot of people like to see things as like, eso allá en Palestina no tiene que ver conmigo, pero what we are seeing are these catastrophes spreading like the wildfires. So one person's catastrophe that you watch on the news could be in your living room, could be in your backyard or your front lawn tomorrow. And it's not just the internet. The internet has created this shift in what we know and our popular culture by creating a flattening where everything is becoming more and more homogenous. One of the things that I most criticize is the slang. You don't have regional slang as much. You got like a middle-aged white housewife in Kentucky using the same slang as like an urban kid from the Bronx. All of these things are taken and replicated and replicated and replicated. The same dances that are happening in South Africa are being turned into like dance challenges across the globe. And what's ironic about that homogenization of culture is that there's a way that climate change, there's a way that corporate capitalism has affected the planet, and that climate change is coming around the planet on top of natural climate change. There's natural cycles that the earth will go through, and climate change will occur naturally. There was no fossil fuel burning that resulted, right, in global warming and of the past, and in the melting of ice ages, and all of these things were happening without the influence of humans long ago. You have those natural processes that the earth will take itself through. And then you have the ways that humanity today and corporate capitalism today does influence, does intervene, does exacerbate these natural processes, or disrupt them, or makes them more acute, right? Hurricanes are natural, but hurricanes on global warming is a whole other freak show that we're seeing. So all of these things come as lessons and come as avisos that we can heed, that we could incorporate into our daily lives. Post-COVID, as I'm seeing in my own family today, there are all these little things, these ailments, these respiratory things, these gastric things that are surfacing more and more and more and more. So people are always sick this time of year, and it ain't always COVID. And so we're being called to consider all these things that have weakened our immune systems, How are we eating? How are we sleeping? How are we resting? What are we exposing ourselves to energetically? How is all this radiation wearing on our bodies? Or this wirelessness making our bodies go haywire? How can we mitigate it? How can we protect from it? How can we be selective with it and the exposure? How are we sleeping? What devices are on our nightstands, next to our beds, next to our heads, next to our brains? How are we allowing this with our children whose skulls are still in development, whose brains and endocrine and immune systems are still in development, nervous systems? So that is my so-called New Year's contemplation around this full moon, the first full moon of the new year, though this cycle that we're living with this moon started December 30th. Right, so December 30th for me was like, okay, I'll make this my new year. For others, it will be the Lunar New Year, with the first new moon later this month. For others, they follow the astrological New Year, which is later in the spring, or that spring equinox will mark a new year. For others, we all have our different systems, our different cycles. We have inner clocks and calendars. That's the other one, with the jacking of our circadian rhythms. Them LED lights that be driving me crazy. Bright ass fluorescent lights when your body is supposed to be shifting into sleep mode. And we got our houses glowing like it's broad daylight. We have a TV, we have a computer screen, we have phone devices in our faces with blue lights which mimic daylight. And then we turn off the lights finally to go to sleep and wonder why we're lying there awake for however long, ruminating over all the things we haven't done in the day or the things we got to do the next day. All of these cycles that we have been disconnected from. The moon cycle that women would bleed with. How we've fallen out of sync with the moon. Are we familiar with our menstrual cycles and what each period of that cycle represents? Because it's not just one period, there's different periods within that greater period. Are we familiar with them? How does the body react and respond when you are ovulating versus when you are bleeding? All of these things that have been suppressed by medicine, by diet, by stress, by contraceptives. Rematriation as a conversation goes so deeper. Rematriation of the body, our own wombs. I'm very much a believer in the chakra system and the energetic system, the energetic body everybody has. This energetic space of creation, of creativity. That is the womb. That is the second chakra. That is the sacral. That is the seat of emotions. That is the seat of creativity, the seat of pleasure, the seat of fluidity. Your ability to be fluid, your ability to be adapting, your ability to experience sweetness, to experience joy, to experience pleasure in life. Aligning all of that, aligning the body to the rhythms of this earth. Our heartbeats at the same frequency of the earth. How do we honor that every day? How do we honor our hearts as the true energetic center of our bodies, not our overthinking minds? And then after all of that is reset, then we can consider clocks, calendars, deadlines. Whose deadlines? Whose cycles, whose seasons, whose deadlines, whose schedule, whose clocks. And we could also respect each other's cycles and systems and rhythms. Like all the people who come traveling to Puerto Rico in August on vacation, chilling. Like, come here, come see me 2 hours away, come do this. And I'm like, yo, I don't know about you, but we just started school over here. We started school and everything, picks up. Our vacation is over. I'm happy for you that you're on vacation, but we're not. We still have people that still treat Puerto Rico as a vacation never ending. Like people don't live and work and study here, and bust their asses here. Have a different schedule, right? So that's another important part, is respecting and recognizing wherever you are and wherever you are traveling through or visiting or moving to, that there will be rhythms there. In my interview of Jari, one of the Rematriation studio session conversations, she speaks to the rhythm of what it is to live surrounded by ocean and sea. And she speaks to feeling that rhythm was in her. Como ella dice, el vaivén de las olas. The ebb and flow of the surf. What she talked about is that when she was in New York and when she travels, she searches for that rhythm. And she seeks it outside herself, but then recognizes that rhythm is still pulsing in her, inside of her. So there are other cycles and rhythms. I find myself very attuned to the moon. That didn't start here in Borikén. It didn't start here in Puerto Rico. It started in New York, especially around the time with my births and working with a midwife, as that started to awaken ancestral wisdom and memory in me, in my bones, in my cells, from my ancestras, my abuelas, who were birth workers. And all of a sudden, I became much more aware of the moon and of like the few planets you could see. The few stars that you think you see in New York may very well be planets. In Queens was when I started to connect with Venus, with Jupiter, and Mars in the sky. Those were the 3 planets that you could see. And de hecho, today, right now, Mars is like the closest it is to Earth. And it's together with the moon. So we have this full moon, and Bien Chula, she rose yesterday with little orange Mars sparkling at her side and traveled the skies like that. I started that in New York. I came here with that rhythm, and here I was able to attune more deeply to it. The solstice, I was a mess. I wasn't a mess, man. I was exactly what my bones were asking. My bones were like, find some cave, go curl up in there and go hibernate. So much of what I set out to do, so many projects that I had to complete, they still aren't. They're still not done. I record stuff. I don't know when it's going to get put out. There's just stuff. There's life. There's things. One of my kids is sick. I'm still coming off of stuff. My mother's still coming off of stuff. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. I'll share stuff when I'm good and ready. I'll share stuff when I'm good and ready. And when time flows and allows. So to close, because this conversation could turn itself into a loop and go on and on. I'm going to close with this. The irony that I came into all of this from being an activist around Puerto Rican liberation and the word that we most use en el campo, ¿verdad? De la lucha es la resistencia, resistance. Come here and find out that I can't mess with that word no more. Resistance for me, my work, my activism shifted here, where I don't see it as a resistance of colonialism in the US. And clearly that is what is happening to a degree. But my focus has shifted to centering and allowing our essence as a people. If we are to lift our identity as a people, our collectivity and our nationhood as a people, then our shift and our focus must be centering ourselves and allowing that essence to exist and allowing ourselves to align to it. So if I live in resistance to the opposition, to the oppressive forces, then my focus and energies go there and are taken away from myself and our own people and our own needs and our own beauty and our own brilliance and our own work. And that to me is part of the alignment. Because what I find is that when I align more and more to that ancestral wisdom and that essence, then I don't even see that crap no more. I don't even perceive it. I know it's there. I'm still affected by it. And I'm still working against it or working to undo it, but through my own avenues and means, which is to lift our authenticity and essence so high that this just falls away. And that is the brilliance of what Bad Bunny is doing. Bad Bunny created on his own authentic essence, defying gender norms, bringing all his, peoples with him on stage in a televised concert and lifting all his peoples, all his musicians, all these folks, by virtue of his own brilliance, his own authenticity, raises his platform to a global scale. And when he gets there, takes that platform and uses it to lift everything that is his people, everything that is this archipelago. That is the strategy. He doesn't have to say anything against or do anything against anyone. He gained the attention and the love of his people, of the people across the damn planet. Y de ahí, y de ese punto, he is now putting out the full spectrum of the essence and returning to the essence, which is not to abandon everything he was, coming back into tradition and coming back into culture. And so there comes a time when you are so much yourself, unapologetically and authentically, and boldly and beautifully and brilliantly, that in and of itself is the resistance. You no longer have to put energy into it because you are so boldly, fully you, that anything colonized in you falls away. So many people talk about reggaeton not being us, or what pitorro is the correct pitorro, or all the ways they police what we call ourselves and who we are, what's right and what's wrong of our essence, which is not meant to be policed. But when you look at our people, the way that colonialism most manifests is just people people striving day to day to have an education that is informed by the colonizer, to have jobs, to have salaries, to have accolades, to have titles and awards and all of these things, amenities that are set forth by the colonizer. The best, the most brilliant of us, as we would see, as we would deem by societal standards, are seeking in some way, shape, or form to emulate the colonizer. Part of aligning to our essences, determining for ourselves what does success look like, what are our greatest currencies. I would say it's wellness and health. De que vale que uno tenga cuentas, casa y carro y cuenta de banco if mentally you're a wreck and physically you're not well. Where is your heart? If there's anything I'm resisting right now, it's them damn clocks and calendars and deadlines and urgency culture. And all the impositions that say that I got to do this and I got to post this many things and this number of days out of the year, the week. And because if I don't do that, my algorithms are going to suck and I'm not going to have enough followers and likes for other people to feel that my stuff is deemed followable and likable. That's the crap that I'm resisting. It is to exist in the highest, most authentic expression of who I am and what I do at my own pace and rhythm. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rematriating Borikén podcast. By the way, if you have any comments or questions, and questions in particular that are raised from any of the conversation that this brings up or previous episodes bring up, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm thinking that if questions come in or if you want to write me directly through Instagram at Rematriating Borikén or via the rematriatingborikén.com website. If you have questions, then I could funnel them into future episodes. And if they're real good ones, then I can make a podcast episode around that specific theme. Podcast episodes usually are posted around the new and full moons with some surprises in between. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe. You can share with others. Thank you so much for supporting. Much love.